What happens when you lose inspiration and you're no longer loving what you're doing anymore? What do you do when you're in that transition? We need to have autonomy, mastery, intrinsic motivation, and purpose beyond yourself. This is really the formula for meaningful work. When we become aware of our motivations, this process follows the hero's journey. Our hero starts off weak, disempowered, flawed. As our hero makes the decision, do I want to keep living this way or do I want to heed the call? The journey of the hero is always one of becoming strong, of reconciling self-doubt, learning how to be courageous. Everything that you endure is an opportunity for you to create meaning. So if your life is not currently deeply meaningful, reflect on what have you overcome and turn it into wisdom that you can share with the world. You go on a hero's journey, if you go on a quest, you must share what you've learned. And that becomes the next iteration of your work. That becomes what is going to be the most meaningful thing that you can do. Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Advice Podcast. Today we're going to be deep diving into meaning and purpose. What happens when you lose inspiration and you're no longer loving what you're doing anymore? What happens when you don't know what to do with your life? We're going to be deep diving today into all things meaning. And I'm going to also touch on the nature of suffering. Today is going to be a very philosophical episode, but also bringing the practical in. Something that I've observed over the last year or two that I've been in the online space is a lot of entrepreneurs, and they'll either reach burnout or they'll reach a point where they're like, I just don't really want to do this anymore. I don't love what I'm doing anymore. And what we're seeing here is the original inspiration or the original motivation is no longer relevant. It becomes extinct. And so I think what's really interesting is that this is even possible, that a motivation can expire. So keep in mind that the reason why you got into business in the first place, or the reason why you started your career, whatever it is that you're doing, your artistry, this project, everything in life is impermanent. Nothing is going to last forever. And I think that we're living at a time now where people's careers do pivot and change naturally quite rapidly. We don't live in the 20s or the 50s anymore where people would have these 30 or 50 year long careers. A lot of us are shifting and changing what we're doing every 5 years or even more frequently, right? I have recently found myself at a career transition, and that has been a really interesting thing for me to navigate as I've been in that 6-7 month season of kind of moving back, not being so online, not working as much, taking an active sabbatical where I wasn't on social media, I wasn't working, I wasn't seeing clients, I wasn't marketing. I was able to really observe many other people in their pivots or in their desire for a sabbatical, in their desire to shift and change, and to not actually know what to do instead. And I think that presents a really scary thing. So, I've shared obviously my experience with how I knew it was time to shut down what I was doing. I've talked about the business model. I've talked about, my original desire to be an artist. But I think something that's really practical and very helpful for a lot of people is to actually talk about what comes next if you don't know what that is. What do you do when you're in that transition where you're like, it would be rare, I think, for people to kind of be in a situation that I was in where I was like, I've always wanted to be a writer and I'm just going to do this 4-year detour. That's not going to be common or relevant to everyone. What is going to be relevant to a lot of people is when you've been doing something for a long time, maybe that's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, and you wake up and you don't want to do it anymore, then what comes next? What do you do instead? And so I've had more micro versions of that scenario within myself. And, the reality is I do still need to have a business of sorts. I do still need to create income for myself. I'm not fully retired just yet. So, it's really asking the question, if I am no longer compelled by the reason why I started this thing in the first place, how can I feel compelled to wake up? Because what's really important is that we do have a purpose, that we do have meaning. So most of us want to have a good life. Most of us want to feel pretty fulfilled. We want to feel joy. We don't want to wake up and force ourselves to have to go into work every day, especially if you're someone that works for yourself. And something that is really important for you to know if you want to have a good life, if you don't want to be spending all of your energy fighting against the grain, is this concept of intrinsic motivation. So I'm actually going to deep dive into the psychology of flow and into the psychology of intrinsic versus extrinsic in a different episode. But what I want to introduce to you today is this concept of the 4 pillars that are scientifically kind of proven to provide us with the good life when it comes to our work. So in order for us to enjoy our work, we need these 4 elements. One is autonomy. So we want to have, freedom to be able to do work the way that we want to. We don't want to have a boss micromanaging us, hunched over us, telling us how to do things, what to do, and I think that in our previous episode, we talked about social media. And I think that when we have that toxic relationship with social media, we lose and sacrifice a sense of our autonomy, which is why we can feel so sad and depressed and in disarray. So I want you to really think about autonomy and how you can create more autonomy for yourself, because you don't necessarily, have to be an entrepreneur or an artist or a freelancer to have autonomy. You can have a lot of autonomy in a job as an employee. And it really is about having healthy relationships with that organization, with your coworkers, where, they give you that level of freedom. And, maybe to you, you have a value for working remotely, or working, location independently. And so maybe you don't have to go into the office at 9 a.m. every single day. Maybe there's a bit of flexibility where you do go in every day, but no one's watching the clock and, tapping their foot down and being like, hey, you were late, and like they're timing your bathroom breaks. I remember I had a job once where, they would, I used to work so much overtime, right? And I would work on weekends and they would be looking at me if I was 10 minutes late. And I was just like, guys, are we really counting the minutes? Like, I work easy 50 hours a week and you're getting upset about 10 minutes. Like maybe I should stop taking the 7 a.m. Saturday time to check the website for the client, right? Like, come on, what are we doing? This is madness. So, think about autonomy. Think about that level of you being able to do your own work when you want to do it, within the freedom and the scope of how you want to do it. That's really important. We need to have autonomy in order for us to feel happy and fulfilled about our work. Now, the second thing that we need is mastery. So this is where, we talk about flow states a little bit more, and there's a whole science to mastery. But essentially, we need to feel like we're good at something in order to really enjoy it. So this is why people get really obsessed with the conversation of like, well, what are my gifts and what's my genius? And can someone tell me what my genius is and what am I good at? And, we want to do things that we're good at. We want to work in areas where we naturally shine. We want to feel competent. We want to actually feel masterful. When we are good at something, we're spending our time engaging in that thing, and then we're recognized for being great at that, it's very, very fulfilling. We don't want to be doing something that is not a natural strength. Right? So there's 2 aspects of mastery. One is doing something that you're naturally good at. And the second is committing to becoming better at that thing. And so something that I regularly talk about is putting in the reps. I think that in today's culture, people are very lazy and people just think that they're going to get paid for like something that they're naturally good at. But you still need to commit 10,000 hours to doing something to become masterful at it. Like, I'm a naturally good writer. I'm a naturally good communicator, but I can tell you that I have spent hundreds upon hundreds, I don't know, maybe thousands of hours working on my ability to become a better writer, working on the craft of specifically writing email copy, writing sales pages, writing ad copy, writing content in different formats, in an essay format, in book format, like in social media posts. I've done professional speaker training. And when I did professional speaker training, I had a rude awakening and realized how hard it is to be a professional speaker. Like there's a lot of practice that goes into that. And people that train for TED Talks train for 6 to 12 months in advance. If you are a professional speaker, you need to have the level of mastery where if you have, let's say, a 40-minute talk, that talk is broken down into smaller vignettes. And if you are at, a conference or a seminar and they say, hey, we need to take your keynote, we need to adapt it into 25 minutes, you should be able to on the spot go, okay, cool. And then which vignettes to take out to adapt that 40-minute talk to 25. And you don't go over time. And that is the job of a professional speaker. You need to be able to engage in different audiences and see what they're responding to, and then to be able to add in or remove different vignettes based on, what that particular audience is finding most compelling. There is so much that goes into professional speaking. There's so much that you need to know about rhythm, intonation, pauses, dramatic effect. I'm a naturally good storyteller, and I can tell you that I considered a career in professional speaking, and maybe that is something that I would get into at some point, but it's not something that I can just pick up tomorrow, because I would need to commit at least 12 to 24 months, if not a lot more than that, to actually doing that properly, to become masterful at it, where I feel masterful or at least competent. So a really good reminder for everyone when it comes to mastery is that you still need to put in the reps. You might be good at something, but in order for you to become a genius at it, in order for you to really feel like, yep, this is my domain, you've got to practice. You've got to show up every day with that thing in order to feel the joy for it. So discipline is a road to joy. The third thing that is imperative in our quest for fulfilling work is the intrinsic motivation aspect. So we can either be intrinsically or extrinsically motivated. If we are extrinsically motivated, we are motivated for the outcome that we get from doing that thing. We are motivated by the reward. So that would be, for example, being motivated by money or being motivated by audience growth or likes. Whereas if you are intrinsically motivated, you are motivated for the love of the thing itself. You are motivated by the progress of the thing. You're not looking for outcomes. You're essentially detached to outcomes, right? So it's like, if this podcast never gets any views, if it never goes viral, if it doesn't become a #1 chart-topping podcast, I really wouldn't care, because I'm so excited about showing up here and just recording these episodes. Like, I'm really genuinely having a great time. And so whenever you are engaging in work, it's really important that you're asking yourself why you are choosing this thing. What are you getting out of it? And for you to be really, really honest with yourself about your values and finding those bits of intrinsic inspiration where you are not attached to an outcome, where you don't need it to do something for you and you don't need to get something out of it, or there can be other things that you can get out of it, but you are essentially not relying on those outcomes in order to be happy with doing the thing. So when we have an extrinsic relationship with work and we're doing it purely to survive, and so we are doing it for money, then it can become really detrimental to our mental health, because essentially that starts to degrade and erode at our mental health and well-being. So like I said, I'm going to go into this a lot more in a future episode. A lot of this subject matter is actually what my nonfiction book is about, because it's been a really big part of my journey is that 4-year period where I was really building this business. And, as I mentioned, I was so motivated by money because I wanted to build up that safety nest and that egg, that little financial pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so that I could then go and feel that safety to then go and pursue my creative work. Like, that was really hard for me, and I was very aware of all of this psychology towards the end, and probably about halfway through became very aware and started learning about it, being like, wow, this is really imperative. And oh my God, it's really important. But, showing up every day for something that you're aware that there is an underlying extrinsic motivation, you also need to kind of combat that and offset it by finding intrinsic motivations, right? Like enjoying helping people, enjoying the impact, loving different aspects of the creative process in the marketing, or, different aspects of having a team. And you got to find things that you love, and you got to be like, yeah, well, I love this and I love this. And you got to know where those lines are and try and have the intrinsic stuff outweigh the extrinsic stuff, right? There's, to some degree, we do live in the world that we live in, and there's always going to be elements of reward. And I think to some degree that's unavoidable. But if you're mindful of the things that you're inspired by that come from within. And if you're mindful of the parts of you that are motivated for the outcomes, and you can start to do that inner work. And we'll talk about all those types of questions and how you can coach yourself in that regard in a different episode. But the fourth thing that I want to talk about today, and this is part of our Venn diagram here for a fulfilling work life, is having a purpose beyond yourself. So when you have these four things, autonomy, mastery, intrinsic motivation, and purpose beyond yourself, that's when you have work that you can engage in that is fulfilling, it's rewarding, and you are like, yes, like I love my work, this is great. And so this is really the formula for meaningful work, right? So a purpose beyond yourself. Now, when I was younger, I really was obsessed with the idea of purpose. I studied philosophy, and I was very Aristotelian in my way of thinking when I was a bit younger. I'm not so much that way of thinking anymore, but I loved Aristotle's concept of the telos, which is that, humans have, the concept of the telos is that humans are naturally goal-oriented people. Like the sheepdog, we are happiest when we are in pursuit of a goal. And so we need something to pursue. And when we're pursuing something, that's when we are happiest and full of joy. I used to really believe that. And so I was very obsessed with the idea of, finding the thing that I could pursue that would make me happy. I don't really believe that anymore, and that's because I have a much more scientific leaning philosophy now. So where I sit now is a little bit more in the branch of like optimistic nihilism, because it also sort of is the most relevant philosophy that reflects Eastern Zen Buddhist ideologies, but in a Western way. So what I'm going to talk about today is this intersection when you get to the point where you're like, okay, I had a motivation or I had an inspiration, and that's now no longer doing it for me, right? You sort of are in this relationship to your work and you're no longer inspired by it. So first of all, why does that happen? I think that if you are extrinsically motivated by whatever it is that you're doing, and you're just doing it for the money or you're doing it for something else, that is going to have a countdown timer, right? Like that's like a bomb, like it's just going to tick, 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 and it's not going to last forever. So that will eventually count down and it will expire. Now, a lot of the time, I think people choose careers or they choose avenues for work based on external value systems of others. So it could be the value system of society at large, the collective. It could be the value system of a family member like mum or dad, siblings. It could be a partner. We often do things that we think other people want us to do. And so this is how we engage in extrinsic motivations, right? If mom or dad or your partner or your brother or whatever were like, oh, this is a really good career, and then you engage in that and you just never really questioned it, it's probably because there's a part of you unconsciously that wants to be loved and accepted and approved of by them. And so maybe that motivation isn't money, it's love, it's acceptance, it's to be a part of that tribe, it's safety, it's security. And so most of us, a lot of us, until we're conscious of it, are in some way, shape or form engaging in work that is fueled by an extrinsic motivation of being loved and accepted. And so if we do this thing, then we're going to be loved, we're going to be safe. And as long as you are getting that love and safety, it's doing its job, right? You're getting the outcome that you want. But if you're pursuing something and you're still not getting the love and the acceptance that you want, like I did when I was younger, then you're going to feel really, really unhappy. And you're going to be like, what is going on? Like you're supposed to love me, you're supposed to be proud of me. And this was my relationship with my mother. And that led me to, learning all of the psychology here, which is so valuable. But when we're at this point, and you either have that motivation that expires or it doesn't actually produce the outcome, you're going to end up in some kind of crisis where you're like, well, I'm looking for the outcome that I want, which is to feel good. I want meaning. I want to feel fulfilled. So what do I do? Often when people become aware that this is happening, when people become aware of the extrinsic motivations and they're like, oh, I was actually just doing this for validation, or I was doing it for approval. I really wanted to be successful because I really wanted my parents to be proud of me, or I really wanted to show that little girl, or I wanted to show my little boy that like I really wanted to grow up one day and achieve these things. When we become aware of that, then we're presented with this kind of void of, oh, well, do you want to work through this now? And so usually what happens is we need to disengage from that activity so that it's no longer producing those emotions of angst and frustration, sadness, stress, etc. So that's when that break kind of occurs. Now, what's interesting here is that this process of uncovering our motivations for work and realizing that, we've actually been seeking this thing outside of ourselves, and now we're presented with the awareness of it. This process follows the hero's journey. And so this is a process referred to as the monomyth, coined by Joseph Campbell, a famous mythologist and professor, a really incredible thinker. And he basically found that all great narratives over millennia, from the Bible to Star Wars, but all great myth, like in all cultures, from Siddhartha to the Buddha and, all different tales, that they all followed this same structure. So the monomyth is essentially this process where our hero starts off and is presented with some kind of dilemma, right? So the main character, the hero in all of these stories, starts with some kind of calling, right? So there's an awareness that things aren't quite what they seem. And, usually there's like a quest, there's a calling to go out into the unknown, to go off and embark on some kind of healing or some kind of process to learn something, right? But our hero starts off weak, disempowered, flawed. The hero starts as a very flawed person. So if you think about, our relationship to work, and you go, okay, I'm aware that I've been, acting from this space where I've been seeking validation, or I've been looking for money, or I've been looking for love, and I've been looking for acceptance. That is us in our flawed, disempowered human state. And then we receive this calling to change, to shift. And so as our hero makes the decision, do I want to keep doing what I'm doing? Do I want to keep living this way? Or do I want to heed the call? And do I want to go off and figure out what I'm doing, who I am, and how I can solve this for myself, right? So they then go off into the unknown on a quest to resolve this psychological dilemma. And it's not always a psychological dilemma. Sometimes it's like the princess has been kidnapped and, something's been stolen and they need to get it back. But what always happens is that our hero starts off doubting themselves, doubting who they are, doubting their ability. And, the journey of the monomyth, of the hero, is always one of becoming strong, of reconciling their self-doubt and really leaning into and learning how to be courageous. And so it is a journey of going down into the depths of the psyche and reconciling with the self, right? Usually, they'll meet people, so there's some kind of mentor, supernatural aid. There'll be like signs, synchronicities where it's like, yes, I'm on the path. And then they cross the threshold. That's, when they venture out into this realm of no longer being in the ordinary world or being in the matrix or like living in an ordinary way, but venturing down and descending into the self, into the depths of the psyche, and doing that internal work and having those internal battles to then really become strong. And so this is like, in the Karate Kid, where he's training every single day, right? And he's training to try and overcome the bullies. And that's ultimately what we're doing. We start weak, and then we have to become masterful. We have to put in those 10,000 hours. We have to put in the reps to become strong, to overcome our fear, to overcome our self-doubt. What is my meaning? What is my motivation? Like, can I actually heal this part of me that has been seeking for this thing outside of myself that has been causing me pain and everyone around me pain? I believe that we all have this opportunity to go on a great hero's journey in our own individual lives. I don't think everyone heeds the call. I don't think everyone goes off on that journey and leaves the ordinary world. I think a lot of people just stay in the ordinary world, suffering and kind of just dealing with it because, they're not ready yet to go out and venture into the unknown. They're not ready to, leave the safety and the security, and that overrides the other factors. Maybe their pain threshold isn't that great. But for those of us who do heed the call to adventure and go out into the unknown, leave the ordinary world, there is a really incredible journey that you get to embark upon. And so as you go through, these stages, eventually you'll hit the midpoint, which is the revelation. You sort of go into the abyss, and there's this death and rebirth portal where you become the new you. There's an identity transformation. There is this rising from the ashes, this phoenix kind of moment where you become strong and you're reborn. And so, in the origin episode that I recorded for this podcast, I talked about that moment for me when I was doing the acceptance and commitment therapy with my therapist coach, and I was reconciling that relationship with my mother and how I was so motivated to achieve and accomplish and to win at all costs and do things for her because I wanted her to be proud of me. And that was unconsciously driving all of my behavior, and I wasn't free. I wasn't truly free, and so I like to think that there was kind of the first iteration of my business where I was motivated extrinsically, looking for love and validation and acceptance, looking for pride outside of myself. And then I had that hero's journey, that first hero's journey, and then I transformed. As part of that transformation process, I also said a lot of apologies, kind of like a 12-step program, to anyone that I had hurt in the process through my behaviors unconsciously by behaving in that particular way. I think it would be very naive of us to not realize that when we are motivated extrinsically, that we're not accidentally hurting others. Of course we are. There's always going to be damage and shrapnel. So there was a series of apologies and atoning for behavior and then coming back. And so when you come back into the ordinary world after you've had this big internal process and this big internal transformation, you're now a new person. But as a result of going on this quest, you've learnt all of these things. So you no longer have the same beliefs. You no longer can see the world in the same way. You see it completely differently. When you return, you cannot just go back to doing what you did before, because that's not the monomyth. That's not the great quest. That's not the journey. When you return back to the ordinary world, you know what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to bring a boon back, a chalice full of liquid for everyone to drink. Bring it back. I've come home victorious. You don't come back empty-handed. And this is why this is like part of the circle of life. It's like the great circle. Because when you come back, you are bringing all of this knowledge and wisdom and insight back with you. If you went back and just did what you were doing before, it would be as though you never left. You need to bring the lessons back to then share that with your community. And so if you go on a hero's journey, if you go on a quest, you must share what you've learned. And that becomes the next iteration of your work. That becomes what is going to be the most meaningful thing that you can do. And so something that I realized is that we need to start looking at our lives as a series of quests. We need to start looking at our lives as a series of hero's journeys. And if you are yet to go on one, then there's a really powerful opportunity for you to do something and to embark on a quest where you can come back and experience something deeply, deeply meaningful. Because here's a really good example of why this is important, the importance of meaning and how this all kind of works and comes together. Nietzsche, who was a really great philosopher and sort of the father of nihilism, he said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And so the why to live is the reason to live, right? When we have a meaning. And that is a quote that has been very popularized, but it's also something that was deeply influential to Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor. Viktor Frankl wrote one of the greatest books of all time, one of the greatest pieces of literature in modern history, which was called Man's Search for Meaning. And it was about his time in Auschwitz and all of the other concentration camps that he was in. I think he was in about 4 before finally escaping and surviving the Holocaust. And so Viktor Frankl believed that suffering is an inevitable part of life. And, I believe that too. If you are human and, you having a human experience, part of that experience is suffering by just the sheer nature of reality, right? Like, we were going to be attached to things. Our time here is finite. Love is fleeting. Like, there's just suffering in life. Anyone that is constantly portraying an image of positivity, I'd be like, look fucking underneath the covers, because to be human is to suffer. And that's just realistic. And, I'm a very joyful person, but I'm also realistic and very pragmatic. And I think that you need to be mindful that, suffering isn't always going to pervade your entire existence, but it's there. Just like sadness is there and happiness is there. And these are all part of the spectrum, just like ultraviolet light. It's just part of the rainbow, And so as you're moving through life, you will experience grief, you'll experience loss, and you'll also experience deep love and deep joy and deep excitement and gratitude. And all of those things are fleeting. All of them pass. Nothing lasts forever. So because we must suffer, because it's the nature of reality and it's the nature of human existence, the best way to endure suffering, he believed, is to find meaning in it. And this has become a really big part of my philosophy and something that, I'm really enthusiastic about teaching more so. I think that to try and run away from suffering and to try and continually seek, one-sidedness or happiness it's just a waste of time. It's futile, right? You need to embrace both sides of the coin. You need to embrace the duality of life. But the best way to endure the pain of life, to endure grief and hardship, and the shit that we go through, is to find meaning in that suffering. And then that suffering becomes worthwhile. So Viktor Frankl, when he was in the concentration camps, he would do things like he would imagine he was talking to his wife when he was doing hard labor, and that would get him through, right? But I think when he came out of that environment and he went back into Vienna and into kind of normal life when the war was over, that would have been harder, because when he came out, he realized that he learned that so many of his family members had died. Now, imagine it's 1946 and you've realized that all of your family members are gone. How tragic that would be. You could easily at that point have just no will to live. And so this is really what we're faced with. And when Nietzsche says, he who has a why to live can bear any how, this is it. Because if you don't have your family and, it would be very easily to descend into darkness and madness at that point and be like, well, I've just survived brutality and now everyone that I love is gone. I have no reason to live. I have no why to live. Why would I stick around? Because every day from then on could easily be filled with agony. It could easily be filled with just the unavoidable, inescapable grief, loneliness, loss, sadness of what was taken away from him. But what he did instead, we can all learn from. He went on his own hero's journey, where in the absolute darkest of circumstances, he found a way to survive. He found a way to give life meaning, to find hope, to continue to move through the impossible. And that resilience is profound. So what he had really learnt how to do was tap into and uncover, a formula for resilience and really tap into the pioneering nature of the human spirit, the triumph of the human spirit to survive. So at the end of that, he's presented with two options, but a lot of us don't even see the second option. So what I want to share with you today is this second option. He could have been like, yeah, life is fucking meaningless now. But he's like, no, I can create meaning. I can find meaning yet again. And so again, life is not handed to us. You need to do the work yet again to find your own joy and find your own meaning and fulfillment. And you do need to do that work. It's work. It's not easy. So he's like, all right, I can take the 3-year quest that I've just been on, where I've learned resilience, I've learned triumph, and I then can teach that to the rest of the world. And so he pioneers, his own form of psychotherapy called logotherapy shares it with the world, writes essentially a memoir, like it's an incredible book, and he turns his suffering and the most dire of circumstances into something so profoundly meaningful. He spends the next 25 years of his life working in this incredible board role, educating people in Austria, right? I think where people will often get caught up is in the idea that there is some kind of singular purpose, like what's my purpose, there is no purpose, dude. Like, you know, I mean, I've read a lot of Alan Watts, and I'm very Eastern in my way of thought. There is no purpose other than to be alive and to have a human experience. That's the whole point. We're just here to have a human experience. And, you know, I'm going to go into that a lot more in future episodes because I love talking about that. But what I want to share with you today is that when you arrive at that point where you realize there is no purpose, that can be kind of depressing. And so this is like the optimistic nihilism, right? Where it's like, there is no point, you know, like there's no reason why we're here. We're on a moving, spinning rock. And, you know, like we're just kind of here. We don't really know why. You know, no one truly knows. A lot of people think they know, but there's no scientific evidence, right? We don't really know. We're just here to be alive and to, you know, experience being alive. But there are, despite our lack of evidence, you know, for why we're here, there are many studies that conclude our ability to thrive and flourish when we have a sense of purpose. So what we're really looking for is maybe not purpose, but something meaningful. And so what we want to do is we want to relinquish the idea that there's some kind of preconceived destiny, or that there's, you know, like one singular purpose, you know, that we were born supposed to do this one thing. I think that you'll have desires and gifts and, you know, whatever. But really, there is an infinite sea of things that you can do at any given time. And you have free will to change and pivot and be like, I don't want to do that anymore. And you know what? I was a basketball player and I was a successful, you know, professional athlete for 10 years. And that doesn't dictate who you have to be or who you need to be for the rest of your life. You get to change. You get to reinvent yourself a million times. And that's the beauty of it, is that you're not stuck. You don't have to keep doing something for any longer than you want to, for any longer than it's meaningful to you. And you get to go on a new quest. And so here's how you can find the most meaningful thing to do in your life. Like, this is the process. And I'm going to start by sharing a story, because I think that's a really good way of doing it. Even though I've already shared the Viktor Frankl story, I want to share another one. So one of my very early influences, I guess you could say mentors, was Dr. John Demartini. I went to one of his seminars in 2017. I was reading his books and learning his method in like 2016. And then I got to meet him for the first time in 2018 at like his flagship event called the Breakthrough Experience. It's not culty, you know, like Landmark or anything like that. He's not super high pump like Tony Robbins. He's kind of like a cute old man. He's very funny. He's really hilarious, but he's very smart. He's crazy smart. And so, you know, for me, I really resonate with him because he's quite an intellectual, and he's a polymath, and he just knows so much about everything. And I really love that about him, but he's so cheeky and funny. So he has a really incredible story. And I think, you know, he's probably one of the best storytellers I've ever met in my life. And I love his stories more than anything else, more than his method. I think the method is a bit questionable, but his storytelling and his story in particular is deeply impactful. So when Demartini was young, he was diagnosed as dyslexic. He couldn't read properly. He really struggled to learn. His teachers would regularly tell his parents that he was never going to, you know, get like a real job or a real career, that he probably wasn't going to amount to anything. You know, he had these learning disabilities, right? Like, I think he might have even had an ADHD diagnosis as well. I know he just had a lot of learning disabilities and struggles with that. So he really then started to internalize that and believe that he was never going to have that future, that he was incapable of creating something great for himself, because how can you have a great career when you can't, when you have reading disabilities? Like, of course, that's going to be challenging. How are you going to go to a good college? How are you then going to get a good education? There's a system, right? And he wasn't fitting into that system. So he thought that he was doomed to a life of, I wouldn't even say mediocrity. I would say a life of just maybe not even ever becoming anything. Then at, I think, 13 years old, he decided to go hitchhiking, and he asked his mom for permission to hitchhike his way from Texas to Hawaii. He wanted to go to Hawaii. He wanted to learn how to surf. He wanted to be a hippie and be with the surfers. And so she agreed, and she wrote him a little note so that if anyone found him on the side of the road, that they were able to return him home, and that it had her contact number. But she really empowered him to go and be a man and discover himself as a teenager. So, and I think he had, just a little bit of money, enough to kind of get to Alaska or something like that, like to kind of get to that way. He was able to get across the country, hitchhiked across, and there were all these hilarious stories about meeting all these people along the way. But eventually he made it to Oahu, and he then started, kind of camping and living in this tent on the streets. He was sort of homeless, right? Like, he didn't have, a home. He wasn't working. He didn't have like a job. He was living off berries and the earth. He was, fully doing the thing. And then one day he ate a poison berry, and he got strychnine poisoning. At this point, he's maybe like 14, 15 years old, 15 maybe. He gets really crazy sick, and he's sort of having like, not seizures, but he's paralyzed in the tent. And luckily, someone happens to kind of be walking past the tent at the time, and they can sort of hear him like wailing out for help. And this woman comes in. She's like, "Are you okay, kid? Like, what's going on?" He's this adorable 15-year-old boy. And so she gets him to a hospital. They sort him out. And that sort of becomes this wake-up call where he's like, "Oh my God, I almost died." He then goes to like a Whole Foods store, and on the board outside the store, they have those information boards where they're like, do yoga and missing dog, and like, someone is offering these classes, those boards, the community boards. And he sees this sign for community session with Paul Bragg of Bragg Health, and he's going to talk all about purpose, and he's going to talk all about health. And he sees this poster, and he's just like, I need to go to that, and I need to meet Paul Bragg. And, this is kind of during that era, like the late 60s. He was born in 1954. So yeah, I want to say this is like 1968, 1969 sort of time, right? Real hippie free love sort of time. He goes to this seminar that Paul Bragg is teaching, and he's talking about health. But then Paul Bragg conducts this meditation that everyone does, where they cast out a vision for their future. And Demartini, as this like 15-year-old kid, has this vision of himself one day as a great teacher, speaker, traveling the world, and being in front of, hundreds and thousands of people, just like Paul Bragg is in this particular seminar room. And he's like, but how am I going to do that when I can't read? How am I going to be a great teacher and speaker when I'm dyslexic? And so he puts his hand up, and Paul is like, yes, you, sir, young man. And he's like, well, I had a vision of me doing this and traveling the world and, being a great teacher, but I can't read. And, I have dyslexia, and I don't know how I'm going to be able to do that. Like, how do I do this vision? And Paul's like, you come here, son. You listen to me. No one's ever going to be able to tell you who you are, and no one can ever take your vision away from you. He was like, I want you to repeat after me. Every day for the rest of your life, you say, I'm a genius and I apply my wisdom. And you never underestimate the power of your self-talk and what you say to yourself, and your affirmations, you repeat them every day. Don't let anyone tell you who you are. Only you can decide that for yourself. And if you say it enough, you will start to believe it. And when you believe it, other people will believe it, but you need to be stronger than everyone around you. The voices on the inside need to be stronger than the voices on the outside, and that's how you change your life. So the kid, 15 years old, it's like, okay, every day I'm going to say these affirmations. I'm a genius. I apply my wisdom. He gets back to Texas, and when he gets back, he says to his mom, I need to learn how to read, and I've decided that I want to go back to school, and I want to finish my high school equivalent, my diploma, the GED, or whatever it's called, and I'm going to be a genius. And she's like, okay, well, I'm going to help you however I can. And she goes and orders a bunch of books from some kind of cousin. They fill the house with books. And, every day Demartini is just committed to learning, studying, reading. And, he's overcoming his diagnosis. And every single day with absolute conviction, 20, 50, 100 times a day, I'm a genius, I apply my wisdom. I'm a genius and I apply my wisdom. And, over time as he's reading and committing, and, he was slow at first. Like, he was really slow at first. He wasn't just like he got home and then he just became a genius. Like, no, he was slow. He struggled, but he held out, right? And so 16, he's doing it, 17, And I think after about 2 to 3 years of persistence and self-belief and retraining the way that he was seeing himself, he started to really pick up and overcome the diagnosis. He started to become someone that everyone was like, hey, that Demartini kid's a fucking genius. And all these other kids, the ones that used to bully him, were like, can you help me with my homework? Like, can you help me? Can I learn from you? Can I study with you? And he would hear people talk about him in the library, about how he was a genius. And so he kind of created this new identity for himself, and he created this new reality through this persistence and through these affirmations from this moment with Paul Bragg. But what's interesting is that the rest of his life became a quest about learning everything that he possibly could, because the first part of his life was feeling that hopelessness and the defeat that he would never amount to anything, that he would never become somebody, that he would never make an impact in the world, that his life would just be meaningless, purposeless, that he would never do anything important for anyone, for society, let alone himself, that he would never become someone that he could be proud of. And so by going on his own quest of overcoming his own internal barriers and then also overcoming the external barriers, right? Because the internal is the self-belief, but the external is the practicality of the reps, of putting in the work, of doing the mastery things, reading the books, studying, showing up every day, doing the exams, right? It's the Jedi training. And so by doing that, he then is able to overcome something that he thought he would never be able to overcome. And that's the beauty of the hero's journey, is that when you start, you're like, oh, I don't know, is this, you don't know. You really don't know if you're going to be able to get to the end or not. So if you do, it's a really big thing. And by overcoming that diagnosis, by rising above it, and by becoming this incredibly educated, intellectual person with no arrogance, by the way, just a lot of humor, his life becomes meaningful by sharing that wisdom with the world. And this is someone that has such a huge body of work. Like, he has synthesized thousands of disciplines, from axiology to astronomy. I mean, like, everything that you can possibly imagine, he studied it. He's read like over 45,000 books. Someone who was like, couldn't read, to then reading that volume of books. And it's probably more now because I haven't spoken to him for a very long time. So that then becomes, his meaning. That becomes his purpose, right? And if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, then a book that I would love to recommend to you is Inspired Destiny. That's like my favorite book of his that I read in 2016. It's full of so many great case studies and stories of people that have had their own challenges and setbacks and their own suffering and have then overcome them to find new meaning in their life. And there's always an equal and opposite effect to everything that we do. Nothing is inherently bad. Nothing is inherently broken. Everything has an equal and opposite, right? And that's one of the universal laws. So something that I want to impart here is, the opportunity, right? If you are not happy and fulfilled in your work, if you are feeling like you're lacking inspiration, you're lacking meaning, I would really encourage you to look at your life and examine it as though it's either a quest and, it's one hero's journey, or maybe it's a series of quests. Because like I said, you can be someone like myself who is really obsessed with personal evolution and continuing to grow and develop and learn new things. And if you're like that, then you might have a series of journeys that you embark upon. And, when I went on that big quest in 2021, my 2022 was so deeply meaningful because a lot of the work that I was doing was on talking about redefining our relationship to success and realizing that success is not monetary. Success is not about the validation. Success is an inside game. It's about how we feel. It's our relationship to ourselves, and it's about being proud of who we are. It's about the progress. It's not about, the destination that never actually arrives. And so when I was doing a lot of that work and I was teaching all of these concepts, I was so lit up, and I was, receiving a lot of recognition for the journey that I'd been on. And that felt so amazing to have something so beautiful be born of something that was so painful. Last year in 2023, I went on another quest, which, was a little bit smaller in nature, but it was a quest to even kind of deepen my understanding of love and go further into the realm of different relationship styles and understanding sexuality in a different way, and really kind of unpacking where I was stopping myself from experiencing transcendental love because I was stuck in an idea of what I thought love needed to look like or what it needed to feel like. And it's not necessarily that I had this like checklist of boxes, but I definitely had barriers, and I think we all have barriers to how we experience love. And so I embarked on a second hero's journey to really exploring the nature of love and how we build barriers within ourselves against it, and kind of coming to the other side of that and really being like, wow, like I'm relating very differently now because I can see that there is love all around us. Connection isn't something that's found, it's something that's built. And so that's actually a second book that I'm writing, which is kind of on my back burner of list of things to create. But going on that journey was something that was really painful in the beginning, like all of that wounding around love and worthiness. But to then kind of come to the other side of that and be like, I get to write this amazing journey and I get to share that and I get to teach that. That's something that I'm really looking forward to. Where I am currently in my life is, for the last 6-7 months, I've had these chronic health issues that have been building for probably about 5 years, but I didn't really have any serious symptomology until September when I was in that mold house in LA. And it's been hard for me to take this time off and for me to feel like I can't work and I can't do anything, and I'm suffering physically, and I considered myself a healthy person. And so what's really interesting for me now is being at this juncture where I'm like, I don't find a lot of things as meaningful as I once did. Like a lot of the messaging and the opportunity of teaching and wisdom and lessons that I had before, it's just not quite, it's not quite the same. But it's because I have a new pain now. I have a new problem. I have a new arena where suffering presents itself. And that suffering is in the realm of my health. It's my physical wellness. And so I looked at that recently and I was like, right now, so much of my attention is consumed with my physical health, my well-being. I'm on the carnivore diet. I'm working on my gut. I'm working on my kidneys. I'm working on all of these different things. And in this process of being in this pain, I'm also learning so much about the human body, about anatomy, about organs, about water and hydration, about supplementation, and I can see the level of inflammation that pervades our society. I'm learning it's only been maybe 2 months now, maybe a month that I've been learning, but there are so many misconceptions when it comes to health. At the individual level, there are misconceptions, but at the larger level, systemically, we have a lot of issues with our medical system, with our healthcare system, with the pharmaceutical industry, it goes on and on and on, right? And I've become enraged at these systems and at the flaws in these systems and why this happened to me and how could this have happened when I'm a healthy person and I'm a smart person? This shouldn't have happened. And I can see it happening to so many people around me. And I'm having conversations with people where I'm like, hey, why do you do this? And it's just because they don't know. It's just a lack of education, right? Which is most of us are doing things that are actually not good for us. And it's just because we misunderstand and we don't know. And when I start talking to people about the things that I've learned over the last couple of months, they're as shocked and as mind blown as I am. And they're like, I didn't know this. Why didn't I know this? Oh my God. Like that makes so much sense. And yeah, I've been taking these supplements and I probably shouldn't be. And, I've been doing these things and I've actually, not been doing the things that are effective for me. And I'm like, yeah, like I know. Me too, man. I went on this journey. It's fucking crazy. So I am now so passionate about doing education work in the realm of wellness. And I mean, I have no interest in becoming a doctor. I have no interest in going back to school and getting a PhD in Chinese medicine or whatever. But I am interested in using my ability as someone who is a strong communicator, as someone with a platform, who loves writing and speaking and interviewing, to create content with the people that I've been working with that have been helping me in my wellness journey to, already in like 3 weeks, I've become a lot better and feeling so amazing with my digestion and my gut healing, to just set the record straight and actually share this information for free, because it should be free. Like, your health should be your birthright. Like, it shouldn't be expensive for us to heal and get the right information. So something that I'm personally finding really meaningful in this next season of my life is doing education work around wellness. And, I'll figure out the monetization later. I've got a couple of ideas, but right now that is something that feels really meaningful for me. Like, the idea of overthrowing and just kind of, rectifying all of the problems within those systems of healthcare, it's something that I never imagined that I would ever be interested in. Like, I just never saw health or wellness, longevity, like the body as something that I would ever venture out into. But because it has pervaded my life so much over the last couple months, because there has been so much suffering, I now have this vested interest in doing it. It's now really meaningful for me. So every hero's journey that you go on, every bit of suffering that you have, you can turn that into something deeply meaningful, and it doesn't always have to be this giant thing where it's like, well, this is now the work that I'm doing for the rest of my life. It can be a project, and a really good example of a project is like, when I went through the mold poisoning last year and I was in that house for 2 months and I was so sick, and I was like, oh my God, mold is affecting like 45 million Americans. It's affecting, I don't know how many people across the globe. I then made a documentary about it, and coming soon to a theater near you. Maybe not, we'll see. I'll let you know. I'll keep you updated on the documentary process. But making that documentary gave me so much meaning. It took the suffering and the pain of me feeling like I had lost 2 months of my life, 3 months of my life that I'm never going to get back, a time when I was supposed to be working on my book. And I was like, well, now I've made something that's really meaningful. I've turned it into art. Like, I can't imagine something better to do in a moment like that, because it changes the narrative for me. You know what I mean? Like, rather than having this narrative of like, well, I went through this really horrible thing, like Viktor Frankl, and, like, it was just so horrible and life sucks and I'm a victim. I'm like, yeah, I went through this thing and I fucking turned it into art, man. I turned it into something that can help people. And now I'm really excited about it and I'm really jazzed about it. And it gets to be my mission to share that. Like, everything that you endure, all of the suffering and the pain that you endure, is an opportunity for you to create meaning. And that's how meaning is born. Remember this: values come from voids and meaning comes from suffering. So if your life is not currently deeply meaningful, I want you to use this episode to reflect on the different things, that you've experienced in your life where you have suffered, where you've experienced pain. What have you overcome? And how can you take that journey and turn it into wisdom that you can share with the world? It doesn't have to be art. It can be teaching. It can be a mission. But those quests that you go on, that's the key to a deeply meaningful, purpose-filled vocation. And if you are yet to overcome something that is hard, then I hope that this episode inspires you to persist, because you can. So that's our episode on meaningful work. I hope that was valuable and insightful to you. I hope inspiring or compelling, motivating at the least. Let me know what you think. I'm so excited to hear all of the questions that you send in that I can answer in our Ask Phoebe segment. I'm sure that this episode will inspire a lot of Ask Phoebes. So please make sure that you send in your questions to phoebe@modernadvicepodcast.com in voice memo format. And I absolutely look forward to hearing them and answering them on future episodes.